They thought they could just decide. Like always, I was expected to nod, smile, and make it all work somehow. My name is Rachel Connors. I'm 28 years old, a senior accountant at a firm most people have never heard of, and I live what everyone would call a quiet life. No drama, no chaos, no constant emergencies bleeding into my carefully organized world. I built everything I have from absolutely nothing. My degree paid for with scholarships and weekend jobs. My career climbed one promotion at a time. My credit score that actually exists. Even my kitchen table bought on clearance and assembled with my own hands. No handouts, no shortcuts, no family money cushioning the falls. But if you asked my family, they'd probably tell you I'm the cold one. Not because I've ever screamed or stormed out or done anything that could be called cruel, just because I stopped, automatically saying yes. Because I stopped cleaning up messes I didn't make. You see, I have an older sister named Erin. She's 2 years ahead of me in age, but somehow always 5 steps behind in life. Erin has this incredible talent for making every personal failure look like a tragic accident that happened to her rather than a consequence of her choices. Lost another job? The boss was clearly toxic and had it out for her from day one. Evicted from another apartment? Her roommates were jealous of her lifestyle and conspired against her. Another bill she can't pay? Well, she's trying her absolute best, and sometimes life just isn't fair to good people. My parents, Carol and Frank, they swallow this narrative every single time. They never question the pattern, never point out that maybe, just maybe, Erin might be the common denominator in all these disasters. Instead, they just pivot, rearrange their lives, and when they can't fix things directly, they turn to their reliable solution. Me. You're stable, Rachel. You're lucky. You can help. That phrase followed me around for years like a shadow I couldn't shake. Help with the car payment when Erin's got repossessed again. Help with rent when she's facing eviction. Help with bail money when her choices catch up with her. Always help, never gratitude, never acknowledgement that maybe I had my own life to worry about. The rare times I dared to push back, to suggest that maybe I wasn't responsible for solving everyone else's problems, they'd act like I was the one destroying the family. Like I was being unreasonable for wanting to keep my own money, my own space, my own peace of mind. I learned early on that my value in this family wasn't about being loved for who I was. It was about being useful when things went wrong. But usefulness has limits, and they were about to discover exactly where mine ended. Last Sunday's dinner had the same rhythm our family gatherings always had. Same casserole that Mom made every week. Same uncomfortable undercurrent of tension disguised as polite conversation. Same feeling that I was walking into something that had been planned without my input. But that evening, something felt different. Rehearsed. Like they'd practiced their lines before I arrived. Mom greeted me at the door with a smile that was just a little too wide, a little too bright to be genuine. "You look so thin, sweetheart. Are you eating enough? You work too hard." Dad didn't say much beyond a distracted nod and a mumbled, "Hey, kiddo," but his eyes kept darting away from mine like he was avoiding something. Erin was already sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone with the focused intensity of someone trying very hard to look busy, avoiding eye contact like a teenager who'd been called into the principal's office. I knew these signs. When Mom got overly sweet and Dad went unusually quiet, it meant they were about to tell me something they knew I wouldn't like. When Erin suddenly became fascinated by her phone screen, it meant whatever they were planning involved her and she was too ashamed or too guilty to look at me directly. We made it through the salad course with small talk about the weather and my job. Mom complimenting everything like she was buttering me up for something big. Dad kept refilling his wine glass and Erin kept picking at her food like it might bite her back. Then Mom set down her fork, folded her hands on the table in that deliberate way that meant business, and gave me that practiced smile she reserved for requests wrapped in emotional manipulation. "Rachel," she began, her voice taking on that soft, reasonable tone that always preceded something unreasonable. "We've been talking as a family, and Erin's been having such a rough time lately. You know how hard it's been for her to get back on her feet after everything that's happened." I waited. There was always more. "She's going to be moving in with you for a little while, just until she can save up enough for her own place again. It'll be good for both of you. You can help each other out." Just like that. No question, no discussion, no consideration for what I might want or need. She said it like she was offering me cookies, like of course I'd say yes, because that's what good daughters do. Like my apartment was just an extension of the family property that could be redistributed as needed. I felt the entire room hold its breath. They were waiting for me to resist, waiting for the pushback they could then call selfish and unreasonable. They had their responses ready, their guilt trips loaded and aimed. I could see it in the way Dad tensed up, already bracing for an argument. I could see it in the way Erin finally looked up from her phone, watching for my reaction with a mixture of hope and defiance. Instead, I smiled. A real smile, not the forced politeness I usually wore at these dinners. Of course, I said lightly, my voice carrying none of the tension they were expecting. If it helps Erin get back on her feet, I don't see why not. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Mom blinked several times, clearly caught off guard by my easy agreement. Dad exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours, relief washing over his face like he'd just dodged a massive bullet. Erin leaned back in her chair, and I watched smugness creep across her features like moss spreading across a stone. None of them noticed how still I went after that. How quiet. How carefully I measured every word for the rest of the evening. They thought I'd caved, that I'd fallen back into my old pattern of rolling over and making everyone else's problems my own. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ask, was that I hadn't lived in that apartment they were so casually reassigning for weeks now. And I had absolutely no intention of letting Erin or anyone else move into a place that no longer belonged to me. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to lie to my family. This wasn't some spontaneous act of rebellion or a moment of petty revenge. This was the result of years, literal years, of quiet disappointments, of guilt-wrapped favors, of sacrifices that went unnoticed and unappreciated. Years of slowly realizing that in my family, survival came with strings attached, and being the strong one just meant being the most convenient person to exploit when something went wrong. When I was 21 and fresh out of college, Erin's car got repossessed. She called me sobbing, said she couldn't get to her new job without transportation, said this opportunity was different from all the others. She just needed a little help getting started. My credit was clean, and co-signing felt like such a small thing. Such an easy way to help my sister get her life together. She stopped showing up to that job 3 weeks later. Stopped making the car payments 2 months after that. Guess whose credit score took the hit when the bank came calling? At 23, Mom called me crying because the mortgage was past due. Dad had been laid off, Erin had moved back home, and they were drowning in bills they couldn't pay. I wired them $2,000 the next morning without hesitation, emptying most of my savings account to keep my family from losing their home. No one thanked me. At Christmas that year, Mom handed me a mug that said, "World's Best Daughter," and I almost laughed at the irony. When I was 25, Erin got her first DUI, at least the first one we knew about. Dad asked me to help keep it quiet, said it would destroy the family's reputation if people found out. I paid for the lawyer, covered the court fees, made sure Erin had the best representation money could buy. She never said a word of thanks, never acknowledged what I'd done for her. A year later, when she got pulled over again and I refused to help, Mom called me cold and heartless. "You've never understood what it means to worry about someone you love," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Erin's life is so much harder than yours. You've always had everything easy." That was the moment I knew, not suspected, but knew with absolute certainty, that they didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a function, a resource to be tapped when needed. A faucet they could turn on when something broke. A wallet that happened to smile and have opinions sometimes. I started pulling back after that, politely declining requests for money, changing the subject when conversations turned to Erin's latest crisis, saying "I'll think about it," instead of automatically saying yes. They noticed the change and they didn't like it. The pressure increased, the guilt trips became more elaborate, the expectations more demanding. One night, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, the condo I'd bought with my own money, decorated with furniture I'd saved for, paid for month by month with careful budgeting and quiet diligence. I stared at the front door and realized I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore, because it wasn't really mine when they needed something. When Aaron was in trouble or my parents were struggling, suddenly it became ours. My space, my money, my time, my peace of mind. It all became community property the moment someone else needed it more. So I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to the younger version of myself. I called a realtor, sold the condo quietly, legally, without fanfare or announcement. I moved into a smaller rental on the other side of town, a place no one knew about because no one had asked where I was going. I could have told them. Could have sat them down and explained that I was moving, given them my new address, maintained the illusion of closeness. But I didn't. Not out of cruelty, not out of some desire for revenge, but out of pure self-preservation. Because sometimes, when you grow up in a family that only remembers you exist when they need something, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is disappear, just enough to breathe. The text started rolling in on Monday morning. Casual, confident, completely assuming my compliance. We'll bring Aaron's mattress over Saturday morning. Frank's going to help load the boxes Friday night. She's so excited to finally have her own space again. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to. They were speaking to a version of me that had stopped existing months ago, a Rachel who would automatically open her door and rearrange her life and absorb the impact without making a sound. They'd done it so many times before, they assumed the pattern would continue forever. Each message was a small revelation of how completely they'd stopped seeing me as a person with my own agency. They weren't asking for permission. They weren't checking if the timing worked for me. They weren't even confirming that I still lived where they thought I did. They were simply informing me of decisions that had already been made about my life, my space, my future. By Thursday, Mom was texting me daily with helpful suggestions. Let me know if you need anything cleaned before she moves in. Aaron says, she won't be a burden, she's bringing her own dishes. That last one made me laugh quietly into my coffee. Aaron hadn't washed a dish in her own apartment in years, but sure, she was suddenly going to become a model roommate in mine. I let it all play out. Didn't push back, didn't correct their assumptions, didn't give them any indication that their plan was about to collapse spectacularly. I just waited. Saturday morning, I left my apartment early. Got coffee first, then took a long drive across town to nowhere in particular. I walked through a farmer's market I had no intention of buying anything from, stood in the sun longer than necessary, let the normalcy of other people's peaceful Saturday routines wash over me. My phone vibrated. In my pocket 3 times before I finally decided to look. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails. They were trying to reach me, and I had a pretty good idea why. I let the 4th call ring through. Rachel! It was Mom, but not her soft, manipulative voice. This was her brittle panic voice, the one she used when reality didn't match her expectations. What's going on? There's someone here, some man. He says he lives in the condo. He says you don't live here anymore. I let the silence stretch across the phone line. I wanted her to feel it. That unfamiliar space where certainty used to be, that uncomfortable moment when assumptions crumble. You didn't tell us, she snapped, her voice sharpening with accusation. You never said a word. No, I replied, evenly, calmly. I didn't. There was scrambling in the background, the rustle of bags being moved, Dad's voice rising in confusion, Aaron saying something I couldn't quite make out, but could definitely recognize as profanity. Rachel, Mom hissed, and I could picture her stepping away from the others, trying to handle this crisis with the privacy it clearly required. What is this? What's happening? I sold the condo, I said simply, like I was commenting on the weather. Weeks ago, I moved out quietly. I didn't think it mattered since no one asked where I lived. You what? I moved. Quietly. No one seemed interested in my address, so I didn't volunteer it. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of her breathing, sharp and angry. I imagined them all standing on that porch, bags scattered around their feet, the moving truck they'd probably rented waiting in the driveway, all of them slowly realizing they'd planned an invasion and shown up at the wrong castle. Then Dad's voice cut through, loud enough for me to hear clearly. She lied to us. You said she could move in. I said, if it helps Aaron, I don't see why not. I corrected. I didn't say where. Another pause. Another sharp inhale from Mom. And then finally, Erin's voice, smaller than I'd heard it in years. So what, we're just supposed to figure it out now? What are we supposed to do now? She sounded young when she said it. Not angry, not entitled, just lost and confused and maybe a little scared. For the briefest second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost wanted to solve this problem too, to make it easier to be the reliable sister who always had answers. But I didn't. Because here's what they didn't understand. I hadn't sold the condo out of anger. I hadn't moved across town to make a point. I did it because I was tired of living in a space that never felt truly mine. I did it because I deserved to come home and not brace for impact. And because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people who refuse to change is to stop making it so easy for them to stay the same. They thought that was the end of it. A crisis to be managed, a problem to be solved, a temporary setback in their grand plan to reorganize my life without my input. They were wrong, because by evening they were standing at my actual door. I knew they'd come. Even as I sipped my coffee that Saturday morning, even as I let their voicemails pile up unanswered, I knew Mom wouldn't let this go. She'd dig, make phone calls, probably drive around the city if necessary, because in her mind, I was still her. Daughter first and a person with boundaries second. She'd find me because she needed to prove that no matter how far I moved, I was still reachable, still obligated, still ultimately responsible for making their problems go away. By sunset, the knock came. 3 quick clipped hits against my door. The kind of knock you hear when someone's trying to stay polite but is barely holding it together. I looked through the peephole and saw them. Carol, Frank, Erin, and behind them a car still packed. With boxes and bags like they were planning to move in right then and there, I opened the door halfway. "You found me," I said flatly. Mom looked disheveled in a way I'd rarely seen. Her lipstick was faded, her hair pushed back like she'd run her hands through it too many times. Her usual composed appearance cracked around the edges. "We tried calling," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. We didn't think you'd be here." "It's my apartment," I said. "But you said—" Dad's voice was rising now, the careful control he usually maintained starting to slip. "You said she could move in. Now we're standing here with all her things and you're acting like we're strangers." I didn't move from the doorway. Didn't raise my voice or show any of the emotion they were clearly hoping to provoke. "I never said she could move in here," I said clearly. I said, "If it helps Erin, I don't see why not." That conversation was about the old place, which, if you'll recall, I don't live in anymore. Erin stepped forward then, her arms crossed, her cheeks red with the kind of fury that comes from having your expectations shattered. "This is petty, Rachel. You always act like you're so above everyone else, but this is just cruel." I tilted my head, studying her face. "You packed up your entire life and drove across the city to move into someone's apartment without confirming that apartment still existed. That's not cruelty on my part. That's entitlement on yours." "You're my sister." "Yes," I said coolly. "And you've spent years confusing that with free housing." Dad stepped between us then, his voice edged with the kind of warning he used to use when we were children fighting in the back seat. "Enough, Rachel. We're not leaving. We've put up with a lot from you lately. You owe this to your sister." There it was. The word that had always hung unspoken in our family interactions. Oh. As if every dollar I'd ever paid, every hour I'd worked, every sleepless night I'd spent solving problems I didn't create had been written down somewhere in a ledger, part of a silent contract I'd never agreed to sign. I stepped back into my apartment and picked up my phone. "What are you doing?" Mom asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I didn't answer. I just dialed. 3 rings, then a professional voice. 911, what's your emergency?" My voice stayed perfectly calm, perfectly clear. "Yes, I have family members outside my apartment who are refusing to leave. They're not on the lease, they weren't invited, and I've asked them to go. I'd like to report trespassing." Erin's mouth fell open. Dad swore under his breath, a word I'd never heard him use in front of Mom. Mom looked like I'd physically struck her. "Rachel," she whispered, and for the first time that evening, her voice sounded genuinely pleading rather than demanding. You're calling the police on your own family. I asked you to leave, I said simply. You refused. The dispatcher asked for my address. I gave it clearly, spelling out the street name twice to make sure there was no confusion. Erin's voice shook with a rage I'd never heard from her before. This is going to ruin everything. Do you know what people will think of you? Do you know what they'll say? Yes, I said. They'll say I finally stopped opening my door to people who only knock when they need something. Mom's voice dropped to something smaller, more fragile than her usual commanding tone. You used to be kind, Rachel. You used to care about your family. I didn't flinch. You used to notice when I was hurting. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, packed with every ignored boundary, every swallowed word, every moment I'd said yes when I desperately wanted to scream no. It contained years of being taken for granted, years of having my kindness treated as weakness, and my generosity as obligation. A patrol car pulled up exactly 10 minutes later. The officer who stepped out was tall and calm, her hand resting near, her belt but relaxed, her entire demeanor professional and unflappable. Evening, she said, looking between me and my family with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd seen this kind of domestic situation before. We received a call about trespassing. I nodded. That was me. She looked at my parents, at Erin, at the car still packed with belongings like evidence of their assumptions. Ma'am, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. This is our daughter, Frank said, his voice carrying the indignation of someone who'd never been challenged by authority before. This is a family matter. And this is her residence, the officer replied calmly, which you're not allowed to occupy without her permission. Erin looked like she might cry or throw something or both. Her voice cracked when she spoke. You're going to regret this, Rachel. You're going to regret this for the rest of your life. No, I said, and for the first time all evening, I felt completely, absolutely certain of something. I've regretted almost everything I've done for this family up until this point. This is the first thing I'm actually sure of. The next day, I woke up to 12 missed calls. 5 from Mom, 2 from Dad, and the rest from numbers I didn't recognize. Cousins, probably, or family friends I hadn't spoken to since high school graduation. People who'd heard one side of the story and felt qualified to judge. Then came the text messages, a steady stream of guilt and accusation. Why would you do this to your own sister? Your mother is devastated. She's been crying all night. Erin's sleeping in her car. Is that what you wanted? We always knew you were selfish, but this is a new low. I didn't reply to any of them. I just scrolled through my phone until I found what I was looking for. A Facebook post from my mother. Public, of course, because private pain was never as useful as public martyrdom. 3 paragraphs punctuated by heartbreak emojis and a photo of Erin as a toddler, all chubby cheeks and innocent smiles. We raised both our daughters to care for each other, it read, but one of them has forgotten what that means. We're heartbroken that Rachel, so successful and fortunate, would turn her back on family in our time of need. Erin didn't deserve this. None of us did. Please keep our family in your thoughts as we try to heal from this betrayal. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments from people I hadn't seen since middle school, calling me selfish, cold, entitled, heartless. Relatives I barely remembered chiming in with their disappointment. Former classmates sharing their own stories of ungrateful siblings. Strangers offering to help my poor sister who'd been so cruelly abandoned. It wasn't new, this public shaming. Just louder than usual. I stared at the screen for a long time, reading through the comments, watching the likes accumulate. Then, for the first time in my adult life, I decided to tell my own story. I posted a thread. Simple format, no dramatic. Language, no emotional manipulation, just facts. I screenshot the $2,000 bank transfer I'd made to cover their mortgage 3 years ago. I screenshot my name on Erin's car loan, followed by the collections notice that had destroyed my credit when she stopped making payments. A photo of the lawyer invoice from her DUI case, with my payment confirmation clearly visible. A timeline of every emergency I'd been asked to solve since graduating college, complete with dates and dollar amounts. The receipt showing the sale of my condo, dated weeks before their moving day, and Finally, a screenshot I'd saved from 2 years ago. A text message Erin had sent calling me a boring robot with no life, because I wouldn't let her crash at my place for a month while she figured things out. I ended with one simple line. I didn't abandon my family. I just stopped volunteering for emotional debt. Then I turned off my phone. Not because I was afraid of their reaction, not because I regretted what I'd done, but because I didn't need to see the responses. I didn't need applause or validation or people taking my side. I just needed quiet. And for the first time in years, I had it. That night, my apartment felt different, still, peaceful. No noise from the hallway, no phone buzzing with demands and guilt trips, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old pipes settling in the walls. I made tea, chamomile, not because I needed help sleeping, but because I wanted the ritual of it. A warm cup held in both hands, steam rising like forgiveness I hadn't asked for and didn't need. My phone lit up once, Mom's name on the screen. Then again, 5 minutes later. Erin. I didn't look at the messages. I didn't need to. I knew the pattern by now. Shock, anger, attempted guilt, desperate pleading. Always in that exact order, like they were following a script. I blocked both numbers. Not out of cruelty, not out of some desire for revenge, but because not every door deserves to be knocked on forever. Some relationships require boundaries so firm they look like walls. I walked out onto my balcony. It was cold but not harsh, the kind of cold that reminded you that you were alive, that you had nerve endings, and a body that belonged entirely to you. Below me, the city hummed along with its evening rhythm. People walking dogs, couples holding hands, someone in an apartment across the street washing dishes by their kitchen window. A neighbor 2 floors down saw me and waved. I waved back. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt more genuine than most of the interactions I'd had with my family in years. Inside, I turned off the lights one by one. Living room, kitchen, hallway. No family photos on the walls. No sentimental clutter, just clean space that belonged entirely to me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated or victorious or any of the emotions I'd expected. I just felt done. Done performing the role of the reliable daughter. Done explaining why I deserved basic respect. Done being the emergency contact for people who never contacted me otherwise. Somewhere out there, they were probably rewriting the story again, casting me as the villain in their narrative, the cold-hearted daughter who'd abandoned her family when they needed her most. Let them. I'd spent 30 years trying to earn love that came with conditions and payments plans. I was finally ready to discover what it felt like to love myself without asking permission first. They said I disappeared, that I vanished without explanation. But I didn't disappear. I just stopped being invisible to myself. And that, it turned out, made all the difference.